The creak of a chair echoes through the grand courtroom. The judge's gavel strikes. Bang! Miss Leavitt, he sneers, leaning forward from the bench. This court finds your display of religious symbols disruptive. You are hereby fined. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Eyes dart. Karoline Leavitt stands firm in the center of it all. Small, composed, her silver cross necklace glinting under the courtroom lights like a tiny battle flag. Her fingers gently press the cross against her heart. She does not flinch. She does not bow. Bailiff shifts uncomfortably. Clerks exchange glances. Someone in the back starts recording, the red dot flashing like a warning flare. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and do not forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The judge glares down at her, smug, certain he owns the room, but Karoline's eyes, they burn with something else. This was not just a fine, it was a war. Earlier that morning, the sun broke low over the rolling hills of New Hampshire, casting a soft golden light across Karoline Leavitt's modest home. Inside, everything spoke of quiet strength, the sturdy oak bookshelves lined with worn law books, the faint smell of fresh coffee curling through the air, the American flag folded neatly in a triangular case on the mantel. At the center of it all sat Karoline, alone at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug that read, "Freedom isn't free." On the wall behind her, framed carefully in polished wood, hung a letter, real, personal, a signed note from President Trump himself, thanking her for her tireless defense of American values. Beside it, a simple photograph, Karoline as a young girl, perched on her grandfather's knee, the old man's military medals pinned proudly to his uniform. Karoline's fingers brushed over the small silver cross around her neck, a gift from that same grandfather. It was not jewelry, it was legacy. It was defiance forged into metal. She leaned back in her chair, listening as the local news played low from a battered radio by the window. Another commentator questioning faith's place in public life. Another expert sneering at the old ways, the old beliefs. Karoline smiled to herself, a smile that was half sadness, half steel. They could talk, they could mock, but she would not bow. Her phone buzzed once on the table. Court at noon. Another summons. Another fight. She took a slow breath and closed her eyes. The memories of her grandfather's stories flooded back. Stories of soldiers standing firm under withering fire. Stories of Americans who had bled so that others could pray. Speak. Live freely. Karoline rose from her chair, the cross catching the sunlight like a flare. She shrugged on her tailored navy blazer, the same one she wore when she had first walked into the White House briefing room, and slipped a small leather notebook into her bag. Notes on the Constitution, court precedents, real ammunition. As she stepped out onto the porch, the cool New Hampshire air bit at her cheeks. Across the yard, the old church bell chimed noon, a slow, heavy toll that echoed across the hills. Karoline paused, touched the cross at her throat, and whispered under her breath, a vow meant only for the heavens. Today, they will not silence me. She pulled the door closed behind her and walked toward her car, her silhouette cutting a clean, determined line against the rising American morning. The courtroom doors swung open with a low groan, and Karoline Leavitt stepped inside. Every eye in the room seemed to turn, some curious, some skeptical, a few hostile. The faint tap of her heels echoed against the marble floor as she made her way toward the defendant's table. She wore no protest signs. She carried no banners, only the cross around her neck, small, silver, brilliant, and a leather notebook pressed against her side. Behind the judge's bench sat Judge Ronald Whitmore, a man whose reputation for modernizing courtroom decorum was whispered with both reverence and resentment. Today he leaned back in his chair with an expression that was almost amused, almost hungry. The air buzzed, the clatter of stenographer keys, the shifting of reporters' cameras, the murmured conversations between clerks. An invisible tension hung overhead, thick and uneasy. The bailiff barked, "All rise." Everyone stood. Karoline's cross swung lightly against her chest as she moved, catching the light. A flicker of defiance Judge Whitmore did not miss. As she sat down again, the judge adjusted his robes and spoke into the microphone. "Before we proceed, Miss Leavitt, this court must address your blatant violation of courtroom neutrality." Karoline's brow furrowed. She said nothing. The courtroom itself seemed to hold its breath. This court maintains a strict policy against overt religious displays during proceedings. You are hereby fined $500. Immediate compliance is expected. The words fell like a slap across the room. The murmurs grew louder. A woman near the back gasped audibly. Karoline did not move. Her fingers brushed the cross again, steadying herself. Across the aisle, a reporter from a major outlet whispered excitedly into his phone, the scent of a headline already in the air. Cameras tilted for better shots. The judge leaned forward, cold satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. To him this was already over, but to Karoline, it had only just begun. She slowly stood, notebook still clutched against her side, and raised her head, not in anger, but in clarity. She would not surrender her faith for anyone, not for power, not for comfort, not even for the law, when the law betrayed the Constitution itself. And something in the crowd shifted, a ripple, a shiver, as if they could already sense that today's battle would not go the way the judge expected. The courtroom sat in thick, uncomfortable silence as Karoline stood, her figure tall and unshaken. Judge Whitmore narrowed his eyes. "Miss Leavitt, I repeat, remove the necklace or face further consequences." Karoline slowly placed her leather notebook on the table. Deliberately, she unclipped a folded sheet of paper from inside its cover, the Constitution of the United States, printed plainly, worn at the edges from being read and reread. She raised it slightly, as if reminding the room and the judge and what real law looked like. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "the First Amendment protects not only freedom of speech but freedom of religion. Your order violates that right." A murmur rolled through the courtroom like a distant thunderclap. The stenographer hesitated, fingers trembling slightly over the keys. The bailiff shifted from foot to foot, stealing glances toward the press row. Judge Whitmore leaned back, lips pursed in disdain. "This is my courtroom, Miss Leavitt, not a campaign stage, not a church." "Phew." Karoline's gaze did not waver. "And it is still American soil," she replied. Across the gallery, phones subtly lifted into the air, recording, capturing. The red lights blinked silently, tiny witnesses to what was unfolding. Near the back, a young clerk whispered to an older lawyer, "She's quoting the First Amendment. Can he really fine her for that?" The older man shrugged, but his expression darkened. The tension was becoming visible, audible, breathable. Somewhere, a camera's flash popped, harsh and intrusive. Another reporter scribbled madly into a notepad, sensing history blooming like wildfire right in front of them. Judge Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Miss Leavitt, the court has discretion to maintain order. Religious symbols, political slogans, disruptive attire, all are subject to sanctions. It is not personal." The words were polished, mechanical, but the smugness beneath them leaked out like poison. Karoline placed the Constitution carefully back into her notebook. She adjusted the microphone in front of her, her hand perfectly steady. "The First Amendment was not written to protect what is popular, Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "It was written to protect what is sacred." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the gallery. She continued, "And no judge, no matter how robed or revered, has the authority to strip citizens of those rights because it makes him uncomfortable." The words hit like body blows, firm, precise, inarguable. Whitmore's face reddened slightly, but he covered it with a scoff. "Enough." He slapped the gavel onto the bench with a loud crack. "One more outburst and you will be held in contempt." Karoline did not react. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a second item, a small recording device, legal under public courtroom statutes. She placed it gently on the table, red light on. Recording. Another gasp floated through the room. The judge hesitated, if only for a breath. She was documenting everything, and she knew exactly what she was doing. The room was a storm brewing under tight lids. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably again. Clerks typed slower, glancing up from their desks. The smell of fresh leather, paper, and nerves thickened the air. One of the reporters tweeted furiously, fingers flying. "Breaking. Karoline Leavitt stands her ground over religious freedom in court, refuses to remove her cross." Developing, the tweet hit the internet like a spark in dry brush. Crossing Court started to trend within minutes. Screens lit up across the country. In diners, on campuses, in living rooms, America was tuning in. Judge Whitmore drummed his fingers against the bench. He could feel it too, the momentum shifting under his feet like loose gravel. "Miss Leavitt," he said, quieter now, This court must maintain appearances of neutrality. Your necklace invites controversy. Karoline tilted her head slightly, almost sadly. Neutrality does not mean erasing the people who built this nation, Your Honor, she said. It means protecting them, all of them. The words hung heavy. Somewhere, behind the judge's bench, a junior clerk accidentally dropped a file folder, papers spilling across the floor with a loud slap. The noise shattered the momentary stillness, and several people jumped. Whitmore clenched his teeth. I will not debate constitutional theory in my courtroom, he snapped. Karoline smiled slightly, not with smugness, but with the calm certainty of someone who knows the truth is on their side. The tension stretched thin, almost unbearable now. The gallery teetered on the edge of chaos, reporters whispering into phones, citizens in attendance shifting closer to the aisle, some wide-eyed, some teary, and then, from somewhere at the back, a voice called out, unsteady but clear, "Stand your ground, Karoline." Another voice joined in, "Freedom of religion." Judge Whitmore slammed his gavel again, once, twice, trying to control a crowd he no longer owned. Silence, he barked, but it was too late. The mood had cracked open like a dam. Karoline turned, facing the gallery briefly, her hand resting once again against her cross. "I am standing for all of you," she said softly. Phones caught it, microphones caught it. The world outside these marble walls caught it. The First Amendment, dusty and often ignored, had just come roaring back to life inside a single courtroom, and Karoline Leavitt, with nothing but faith, law, and sheer courage in her arsenal, was standing at its front lines. Judge Whitmore gripped the edges of his bench, knuckles whitening. The courtroom was slipping from his control, and worse, he knew it. Karoline remained standing, calm, composed, almost regal under the fluorescent lights. She glanced once at the gallery, the sea of phones raised, the eyes watching, recording, waiting, and then, without warning, she pulled a second document from her notebook, a thick, neatly stapled brief. She held it up for the courtroom to see. "This, Karoline," said her voice slicing through the chaos, "is the precedent you are violating." The judge blinked, momentarily thrown. "Church of Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah," she continued. "A Supreme Court decision, 1993. Government cannot single out religious practices for special burdens. Your fine against my cross," she paused, "for effect, is unconstitutional." A sharp gasp from the gallery. Even the stenographer hesitated, eyes wide. The judge opened his mouth, but Karoline pressed forward, voice growing louder, more certain. "Furthermore, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination based on religion, public spaces included." The courtroom tilted. Reporters' pens stopped moving. They simply stared. Phones captured it all. The way Karoline stood, the way Whitmore suddenly looked less like a judge and more like a cornered bureaucrat. A low buzz started on X, formerly Twitter. "Crossing court, First Amendment fight. Karoline stands." Near the back, a young man whispered, "Bro, Trump's gonna tweet about this, watch." As if on cue, a buzz rippled through the press row. Someone's phone lit up. On the screen, a fresh Truth Social post from President Donald Trump himself. "Incredible courage by Karoline Leavitt today. Proud of her standing for faith and freedom in a corrupt court. Stay strong." The courtroom practically vibrated with tension. Karoline, reading the room perfectly, lowered the brief onto the table and folded her hands calmly. She did not gloat. She did not boast. She simply stood, unmovable. Judge Whitmore's voice, when it came, was strained, hollow. "The court will reconsider, pending further review." It was not an apology. It was not justice yet, but it was retreat. The courtroom shifted. People leaned toward Karoline like sunflowers reaching for light. The gavel hung in Whitmore's hand, but it did not fall. The symbol of his authority suddenly felt small. The narrative had flipped. The courtroom no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the Constitution. It belonged to her, and the world outside these walls. They were already choosing sides. The silence inside the courtroom was suffocating, thick, brittle, waiting to be shattered. Karoline stood there, breathing slow and even. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, she stepped forward, past her table, past the stunned bailiff, to the very center of the room. Every eye locked on her. Phones lifted higher. News cameras zeroed in. And when Karoline spoke, it was not with anger. It was with a power deeper than rage. The calm, immovable power of someone standing on rock-solid truth. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying, "this is not about jewelry. This is about freedom." Pause. Let them absorb it. This cross is not a disruption. It is not a protest. It is not a provocation. It is a reminder of who we are and what it costs to be free. The gallery leaned in unconsciously, caught in her gravity. 249 years ago, Karoline continued, men and women who dared to believe in liberty stood before courts like this one. Courts that thought power meant permission. Courts that believed government could decide what a citizen's heart was allowed to carry. Her voice thickened, just slightly. Not weakness, emotion. Those men and women were fined. They were beaten. Some of them were hanged. She paused, letting the ugly truth hang naked in the marble room. But they refused to bow. And because they refused, we have what we have today. Karoline lifted the cross gently from her chest, holding it in the light. This cross represents my faith, yes, but it also represents millions of Americans who pray, who hope, who fight battles unseen every day to hold on to their rights. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but said nothing. He knew better. Now Karoline turned, addressing not just the judge but the entire room. The reporters, the clerks, the strangers who would replay this moment 1,000 times over online. The Constitution was not written to protect government from religion. It was written to protect religion and speech and conscience from government. Gasps rippled through the audience. A woman near the back wiped a tear from her eye. A man placed his hand over his heart. When a judge, Karoline said, her voice rising, uses the gavel not to guard liberty but to silence it, that judge betrays the very document he swore to uphold. The power of her words hit like a wave. People were standing now, not chanting, not rioting, simply standing, in silent, growing solidarity. Karoline took one final step forward. I will not remove this cross, she said, voice steady. Not today, not ever. Then, with the poise of a warrior who has already won the battle in her heart, she placed the cross gently back against her chest. The room erupted, not in chaos, in thunderous, sustained applause. Clerks, bystanders, even a few of the hardened journalists. The judge's gavel hammered desperately. Order, order! But the people had already decided. They would not be silenced either. Phones everywhere captured the moment. Slow-motion videos of Karoline standing there, head bowed, slightly cross-gleaming under the heavy courtroom lights. Hashtags exploded across X, Crossin' Court, Karoline Leavitt, We Will Not Bow memes, clips, screenshots flooded the internet within minutes. A digital tidal wave too massive to stop. Back at the courthouse entrance, reporters jostled and shouted their microphones pointed like weapons at the courtroom doors. Karoline, Karoline, how do you feel about today's events? Do you believe religious freedom is under attack in America? What message do you have for the young people watching? Inside, Judge Whitmore slumped slightly in his seat, defeated, exposed. History would not remember him kindly. He mumbled something incoherent about review and future guidelines, but nobody was listening anymore. All eyes, every single one, were on Karoline. As she gathered her notebook and stepped down from the defense table, her movements were slow, deliberate, almost reverent. No victory dance, no gloating, just a quiet, powerful dignity that said, this was never about me. This was about all of us. She paused at the courtroom doors, turned back once, and she smiled, not with arrogance, but with the deep, unbreakable joy of someone who knows they have kept the faith, both literally and figuratively. The doors swung open before her. The world, waiting, breathless, swallowed her up. The courthouse steps were a battlefield of microphones, cameras, flashing bulbs. Karoline Leavitt emerged into the sunlight like a general after a long, bitter war. No security detail, no lawyers rushing to shield her, just her, steady, unshaken, framed by the towering white columns behind her. The crowd roared. Reporters thrust microphones forward like swords. Supporters waved signs hastily scribbled with words like, Faith wins, and First Amendment forever. Karoline did not speak. She simply placed a hand over her cross, bowed her head for a brief second, and walked calmly to the waiting car. Behind her, the courthouse doors slammed shut, and inside, Judge Whitmore was facing a storm he never saw coming. The headlines exploded within minutes. Breaking, Karoline Leavitt defies unconstitutional court fine, sparks nationwide uproar. Faith on trial, how a cross necklace took down a biased courtroom First Amendment. Awakens, Americans rally behind Karoline by nightfall. Every major network was running the story on a loop. Fox News aired a primetime special titled The Cross That Shook America. Even CNN, usually hostile to conservative figures, begrudgingly admitted, today's events reignite serious questions about religious freedom and judicial overreach. On X, formerly Twitter, it was an all-out wildfire. Cross in court, Karoline Leavitt, we will not bow, faith is freedom, all trending, all unstoppable. Video clips of her courtroom speech racked up over 10 million views within the first 5 hours. Memes of Judge Whitmore sweating under the gavel spread like a digital virus. Side-by-side comparisons of Karoline's calm composure versus Whitmore's red-faced panic flooded the feed. Meanwhile, official Washington, D.C. began to rumble. Several sitting senators issued statements praising Karoline's bravery. A joint letter from 5 governors hit the newswire. Today, Karoline Leavitt reminded us all that rights are not given by men, they are given by God. Her courage is a beacon for every American who feels their faith being pushed out of the public square. President Trump himself fired off another Truth Social post that hit like a hammer. The radical left tried to silence a young, brilliant patriot today. They failed. Karoline Leavitt, future of America. Some insiders even whispered about future political endorsements, bigger stages, bigger battles. Karoline had not just won a courtroom argument, she had stepped into the national spotlight, and America was ready for her. And as for Judge Whitmore, his world crumbled overnight. By morning, leaked emails showed that he had been warned about potential First Amendment violations weeks before the case, and ignored them. Petitions for his removal from the bench collected over 250,000 signatures in just 48 hours. Ethics investigations launched. Editorial boards that once praised him fell silent or turned critical. He tried to issue a formal statement claiming miscommunication, but nobody was buying it. In hushed legal circles, the whispers grew louder. He's finished. The court of public opinion already ruled. Whitmore's gavel dropped on himself. By the end of the week, Judge Whitmore resigned from his position under medical leave, an excuse so thin even CNN's anchors raised their eyebrows. In the days that followed, the story's impact deepened. Letters poured into Karoline's office, handwritten notes from soldiers, teachers, pastors, everyday Americans. Some shared stories of being punished for wearing crosses, for praying in school, for refusing to hide their faith. One letter simply read, "Thank you for reminding us that courage still exists." New legislation discussions sparked across state houses. Nationwide, bills aimed at protecting religious expression in public spaces. Legal scholars debated the case on every major outlet. Faith groups organized rallies called Cross Day, encouraging citizens to wear their crosses openly in solidarity. One viral TikTok showed a young girl, maybe 10 years old, clutching a tiny cross necklace and staring into the camera. If Karoline can stand up, so can I. The video racked up 12 million views in a single weekend. The culture had shifted. It was visible, palpable, unstoppable. Meanwhile, Karoline remained quiet. No grand interviews, no self-congratulatory tours, just her, working late nights at her desk, answering letters personally, planning next steps, refusing to turn a moment of truth into a circus. When asked by a reporter if she intended to run for higher office, Karoline simply smiled and said, "I'm just doing what every American should feel free to do, stand." And somehow that answer only made her star burn brighter. The sun dipped low over New Hampshire, washing the hills in gold and fire. Inside her small, unpretentious office, Karoline Leavitt sat alone. The noise of the world, the interviews, the headlines, the cheers, it all felt distant here. Here, it was just her, and the quiet. She leaned back in her leather chair, a steaming cup of black coffee cooling at her side. On the wall before her hung 2 new editions. One, the fine receipt, crumpled, faded, now framed like a battle scar. 2, the official court ruling that vacated the fine and acknowledged the violation of her rights. They sat side by side, a permanent reminder that freedom is never freely given. It is fought for, inch by inch, heart by heart. Karoline reached into her desk drawer and pulled out the little cross necklace. She turned it slowly between her fingers, watching the light catch the silver surface. This tiny symbol, it had rattled a courthouse. It had shaken a nation awake. The news played quietly on a small TV mounted in the corner. A commentator spoke. Since the Leavitt case, new federal guidelines are being drafted to strengthen protections for religious freedom in public institutions. Another headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Karoline Leavitt stand sparks nationwide policy reforms. But Karoline was not watching for fame. She was not looking for applause. She was thinking of the letters stacked high on her desk. The teacher suspended for refusing to hide her Bible. The young student told to remove his cross necklace at graduation. The soldier who carried a tiny rosary into battle, hidden in his uniform. Their battles, their faith, their courage. Outside the window, the last rays of sunlight melted into the horizon. Karoline stood and crossed the room slowly. She adjusted the frame of the court ruling, straightening it by just a fraction, a small, silent act of respect. Then she stepped back and smiled, not a smile of victory, a smile of purpose. She knew the battle was not over, it would never be over. Every generation must choose to stand or surrender. And now, because of one cross, one courtroom, and one young woman who refused to bow, millions more were ready to stand with her. As the screen faded to black, a final line lingered, soft but powerful. She did not just fight for herself, she lit a flame that millions would carry.